So a few years ago, I saw a Frank Yang video, and in the video, he was talking about how everything is a fabrication. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant by that. Perhaps I still don't. But one thing that I've started to realize, and as I was walking today, this really came up, is how our thoughts create an identity that we hold of ourselves. And these thoughts often relate to how other people see us or perceive us. So we may have interactions with people in our lives, and based on that, we perceive how they perceive us. We form a perception in our minds of they think of us like so and so, they interacted with us like this or that. And based on that, we often form identities, and that identity is an identity of us. But that identity, that's like a prison. That's like a prison we are now putting ourselves in. We're saying, this is who we are. We're saying, they see us in this way, so I'm going to play into that character. And this is caused by how humans desire to be consistent. As humans, based on socialization, we like to play consistent characters. We like to be consistent with our past actions. But the problem with consistency is that it causes us to be stuck. It's like a prison when it comes to personality, when it comes to identity, when it comes to how you see and perceive yourself. And so this identity, this illusory box that we've put ourselves in, is ultimately what traps us. Let's just talk a bit more about consistency. Why do we feel like we have to be consistent? Well, I think evolutionarily, when we were in tribes, there was a need to be consistent because you didn't want to scare other people. You didn't want to be out of line. You wanted to maintain hierarchies. You wanted to play into the hierarchy or the place you were given. And if you moved away from that place in your hierarchy or pecking order, what does that mean? That means you could be threatening somebody that's above you, not necessarily physically, but it could be just as coming from a place of feeling challenged. But in the past, it was probably physical. For men, at least, it would be, hey, I'm challenging you. I am now desiring to be the leader. And so the fear that was then implanted is, or the underlying anxiety is, if I step out of line, I could be potentially threatening the pecking order. I could be threatening the situation. And if I do so, I better be ready for the consequences. I better have that inner strength. Yes, I'm going to be that top dog. I'm going to beat him. I'm going to beat him down. Now, we don't live in that sort of situation anymore, although we still have some sort of hierarchies in life, in social or workplace. Now, that idea of, hey, I need to be consistent, I need to have a consistent character, or else there can be consequences, really results in a desire to be consistent with identity that then causes you to notice how other people perceive you and to then start to buy into that. It might not be conscious, it might be subconscious. even still, you're buying into how other people seem to view you. And based on that, you're creating this identity. Now, as I was walking, I started to really challenge a lot of that. And I was really surprised, like, why am I thinking this way? Why is this coming up? Why am I thinking and they're going to interpret me like so-and-so, so then who I am should be like this? And I realized that by doing so, I was essentially mentally putting a prison around myself and saying, hey, I need to be in this box. I can't step out of this box. Now, in another video I made, I talked about how trying to keep a consistent personality leads to social anxiety. It's a great one. I'd highly recommend you check it out. And I think that is so true in socialization and life, which is the identity we give ourselves. For example, if somebody perceives you as not as confident, not a confident guy, or a guy that fits in a certain category, the next time you are around that person, you might notice that you start to play small. There's nothing that they did apart from maybe you may interpret how they view you, but ultimately that's something you're then creating in your mind. You're reinforcing a certain loop or certain pattern based on, oh, they looked at me this way. That means my place in this illusory hierarchy is at a certain place. But ultimately, this is an illusion that you've created. This trapping limits you and binds you. Ultimately, any identity is a fabrication. At its deep core, it's not real. And I remember hearing Frank Yang talk about it. I even heard a guy called Vishrant. He talks about, and he says, thinking isn't real. What you have in your mind, it's not real. And I don't totally love that definition, because what you consider real could mean many different things. You really have to define what real means. But I think at the core, what he's trying to communicate is that the thinking that arises is not, it has no true bounds. That at the core of it, it is truly dependently originating. What do I mean by that? Well, so you have a line. Let's say a line between these two fingers. Boom, boom. You have to have 2 points. 1 point here and 1 point here. Now you can make a line. But the line only exists because you have 2 points to draw between. So now we have 2 dimensions. Then you can make a third dimension, right? So you can start to understand how things physically are dependent on other things. Same as thoughts. Good only exists because we define something called bad. Up only exists because of down. Right only exists because of a concept called wrong. And so anything that you create in the mind is dependent on something else that you've then created in the mind. It's based on assumptions. I assume something to be like this, which means something else must be like this. And that's fine. We go through our lives needing to operate in this way. Using the mind is very powerful. It's a very powerful tool to understanding our reality. But the limitation here is if you don't realize the dependently originating nature of it, and not just understand, but have that experience. And I think this comes when you can see the thoughts, when you can see the belief systems, and when there's less identification, and less identification means you're no longer clinging or craving or holding on to it, but it's just appearing, then you can really see the boundlessness of it, how it's empty, and how it's dependent on other causal chains. But because you're no longer attached to it, you can see, wow, that idea, that's just something that's this illusory thing. I think the real beauty here, and I think people don't talk about this enough, is that because you can see, because you can understand and realize the dependently originating nature and the illusory nature and the fabrication of that thought form, you then have the choice to choose how you want to think. Because ultimately, identity is just what you think. It's not totally real, but it is real in the sense that you can then govern or give a set of assumptions, a set of this idea. You can choose to redirect your thought in a certain way and construct an identity through the realization that whatever identity is there is purely formless and transparent and dependently originating anyway. And I think that is the real freedom, is the freedom to realize that that character that you're playing can play as any character it would like. Because the freedom lies when you can see through the mental prison that you've created for yourself. The mental prison that you've created based on how you think you should play the game, how you think the world should interact or interpret you, and how you interpret other people's cues and other people's body language and other people's perception of you, which is ultimately a perception that you've created for yourself. But realizing that perception is something that you can shift, something you can change, and the change really comes from the fact that there is no place that it's located in. There's no fixed point. It truly is boundless. Experientially, it truly is formless. It truly is empty. But that emptiness then gives rise to the creational aspect of what arises, what manifests moment to moment experientially.